Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The sun hung low over the Thompson firing range, painting the desert sand in streaks of molten gold. Dust swirled around the targets like ghosts, stirred by a wind that whispered secrets only the trained ear could hear. General Malcolm Davin, a man whose presence commanded both fear and respect, stood at the edge of the range, his polished boots kicking up tiny clouds of grit. His tailored uniform clung perfectly to a body that had once led battalions into the fiercest battles. But today his sharp gray eyes were locked on a girl whose age barely grazed 20. Lena, the maid's daughter, stood nervously behind the firing line, her rifle resting awkwardly in her hands. She had been brought here under the guise of a demonstration, though the true intent remained unclear to her. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the scrutiny of hardened soldiers who had seen wars Lena couldn't even imagine. She felt their judgment like a physical weight pressing against her chest. The general's shadow loomed large, swallowing the warmth of the afternoon sun. "So, tell me, girl," Davin said, his voice smooth as a whip's crack, "what's your longest shot?" He tilted his head, smirk playing on his lips, clearly expecting a timid answer, maybe a stumble, a confession of inexperience. It was a joke. He intended it as a tease, a moment of amusement at the expense of someone whose hands were still too small for the world he commanded. The soldiers around him chuckled softly, a low hum of anticipation as they imagined humiliating the girl before their own eyes. But Lena's gaze didn't falter. Something shifted in the air as she inhaled deeply, eyes scanning the range, mapping distance, wind, trajectory. Every soldier froze, feeling the moment stretch like the taut string of a bow. Lena's voice, quiet but steady, broke the tension. 275 meters, she said. A ripple of surprise passed through the group. Whispers ignited like sparks in dry grass. The general's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. 275 meters was no small number. For a civilian with barely a week of training, it bordered on impossible. His eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" Davin said, his tone sharp now, probing. He stepped closer, every movement deliberate, the weight of his presence pressing down on Lena like the desert sun. "You want to demonstrate?" Lena didn't hesitate. She crouched, settled the rifle against her shoulder, her heartbeat thundering in her ears like a war drum. Dust clung to her boots, sweat streaked her temples, yet she exuded a quiet determination that no uniformed man could mask. She could feel every eye on her, measuring, doubting, underestimating, but she had trained for this in secret for reasons none of them could guess. The first shot cracked like lightning. The target, a small steel plate set precariously at the far edge of the range, shivered, then fell with a deaf metallic clang. A beat of stunned silence followed, the kind that seemed to slow the very wind. Soldiers blinked, jaws slack, unable to reconcile what they'd just seen. Davin's lips pressed into a thin line, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Lena's eyes lifted to meet his, steady, unwavering. In that moment, the air felt electric, a silent challenge passing between the veteran general and the maid's daughter who had just shattered every expectation. And then, from the back of the line, a murmur spread like wildfire. "Who is she?" Lena's second shot rang out, hitting the center of a smaller, distant plate. The sound reverberated against the canyon walls, sharp, precise, undeniable. The general blinked, not out of disbelief, but because he knew, deep down, he had just witnessed the first strike in a storm he couldn't yet control. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Whispers became a low hum of tension. And somewhere inside the general, a long-buried instinct stirred, respect, or fear. Before anyone could react, Lena spoke again, calm, almost casual. "Would you like me to take the third one, at 300 meters? A silence fell that was heavier than the desert heat. Every eye turned to the general. The joke had ended. And now the firing range held a tension that would not break easily. Lena lowered her rifle slowly, her breathing steady now, but inside, her heart was a drumbeat of memory. The desert sun had shifted slightly, casting long shadows over the range, and with them came ghosts of a life few could imagine. She had grown up in the small quarters behind the Davin estate, the daughter of Mara, the general's longtime maid. To outsiders, Lena was nothing more than a servant's child, destined for a quiet, unnoticed life. But shadows hide secrets, and Lena had learned long ago how to move unseen, how to strike unseen, how to survive. It had started with her father, or rather, the void he left behind. She never met him, but whispers of his past, an ex-military sharpshooter, a man who vanished into rumors of failed missions and dishonor, had haunted her childhood. Mara had tried to shield Lena from the world's cruelty, but in the still nights, when the house slept and the wind whispered through cracks in the walls, Lena had found herself staring at rusted rifles tucked away in corners. Her small hands trembled at first, clumsy with weight, but determination burned hotter than fear. Every night became practice. Every shadow a target. Every whispered warning from Mara a challenge to grow stronger. By 13, Lena could hit a mark most men wouldn't dare try. She learned angles, wind currents, distance. She measured her heartbeats, calculated bullet drop, felt the vibration of her own pulse sync with the rifle. Her secret training was ritual and obsession, but it was more than that, it was survival. Because the world didn't see the maid's daughter. The world didn't see her until she decided it was time to make them. She remembered the night that had sealed her resolve. Mara had been sick, fever burning her small frame, and the estate had been quiet except for the faint hum of soldiers' voices in the distance. Lena had ventured into the old armory, the metal smelling of rust and oil, and lifted her father's rifle for the first time. Her fingers fit perfectly on the stock as if born to hold it. She closed her eyes, imagined herself on a battlefield she would never enter, aiming for the impossible, and fired into the night. The bullet had vanished into darkness, but the echo had stayed with her, a promise. You are more than they see. You will be heard. By 16 she had perfected the discipline in secrecy, hiding every achievement. She never sought recognition, in fact she avoided it. And yet, here she was, on the firing range of the very general whose presence had dominated her childhood. The man whose laughter had once filled the halls with authority and arrogance, who had never known her potential until now. Lena's gaze flicked to the soldiers behind the line. Some were still stunned, some whispering in disbelief, but all were watching, waiting for the joke to collapse into humiliation. None knew her history. None knew the countless nights spent learning wind and distance, counting heartbeats, and testing her limits in silence. None knew how many times she had stood in shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal herself. A faint smile touched her lips. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not for revenge, not for recognition, but to assert the truth. She was not invisible. Not to her mother, not to the world, not to the men who thought power and size defined skill. She adjusted her stance subtly, inhaling the dry air. The target stretched before her, unyielding and challenging, as though daring her to prove herself again. And then the general's voice cut through the desert wind. Impressive. But you're just a child playing with men's toys, aren't you? The words were sharp, meant to wound, but Lena felt a calm confidence settle like armor over her chest. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she loaded another round, her fingers deliberate and precise. She had a score to settle, not with the general, not yet, but with the world that underestimated her. And somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet fire burned. They will remember my name before the day ends. As the shadow of the general stretched over her, Lena whispered under her breath, almost to herself, 300 meters. The desert wind stilled for a heartbeat. The desert air felt heavier now, the sun hanging like molten metal over the horizon. Lena crouched at the firing line, her rifle steady against her shoulder, the weight of expectation pressing into her shoulders like a mountain. Soldiers shifted uneasily behind her, whispers blending with the soft hiss of wine through the range. General Davin stepped closer, his polished boots grinding against loose sand, eyes sharp, measuring her every twitch. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a wary curiosity that none had ever seen from him. 300 meters, Lena said almost as a question, but there was no doubt in her tone. Her fingers danced over the rifle's adjustments with the ease of a pianist, each movement deliberate, honed over countless nights of solitary practice. She scanned the targets, recalculating wind, distance, and gravity in her mind. Every detail mattered. Every fraction of a second was the difference between triumph and failure. Soldiers held their breath, some instinctively stepping back, sensing the invisible tension. Even the general seemed suspended, the weight of authority meeting the unexpected precision of youth. She exhaled slowly, lining up her sight with the farthest target, a steel plate perched precariously on a rusted stand at the edge of the range. The desert shimmered in the heat, and for a moment, the world seemed to bend around her focus. Her pulse was a quiet drum in her ears. Her mother's words, whispered in memory during countless nights, echoed softly, *steady. Trust yourself. Strike true. The first shot rang out like thunder across the canyon, sharp and commanding. The target shivered violently before toppling over, a metallic scream echoing in the silence that followed. Gasps erupted from the line, soldiers staring as if seeing a ghost. Davin's brow furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. He had seen countless sharpshooters in his career, some legends, some prodigies, but none had struck him like this. None had shattered expectation with such effortless precision. She didn't pause. Repositioning, she adjusted her stance for the next shot. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, but her focus never wavered. The second plate, smaller, farther, almost mocking in its placement, awaited. Lena breathed in, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. Another sharp crack cut through the desert heat. The plate shattered, sending shards glinting in the afternoon sun. Silence followed, heavier than the heat, as every soldier, every officer, grappled with the reality of what they had just witnessed. The general finally spoke, his voice low, measured, carrying the weight of restrained surprise. "You've exceeded expectations." His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. He had underestimated her. He had dismissed her as a girl with no place among men trained for war, and now that assumption lay in pieces at her feet. Lena met his gaze, calm, unwavering. "Sir, do you want me to continue?" she asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had mastered more than just a rifle. The soldiers behind her shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this was no longer a game. Lena had transformed the range into a proving ground, a place where hidden skill revealed itself like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Davin's jaw tightened, a flash of admiration, or perhaps fear, crossing his sharp features. The general's mind raced, recalling every story of her mother's humility, every whispered rumor about Lena's childhood in the shadows of the estate. He realized, with a chill that crawled along his spine, that he had never seen her true strength before. And now, with each deliberate movement, each flawless shot, she was asserting it. Lena raised her rifle again, the third target waiting at the farthest edge of the range. Dust whipped around her boots as if the desert itself was holding its breath. She exhaled slowly, lining up her shot with surgical precision. Behind her, the soldiers watched, the air thick with tension, and then the first whisper of doubt broke through the general's stoic facade. "Is she better than any of my men?" Lena's finger tightened on the trigger, and the desert fell silent, the horizon holding its breath for the final strike. The desert wind had shifted again, carrying a sharp tang of dust that stung the eyes and scraped the throat. Lena crouched behind her rifle, but her mind drifted back to the narrow, dimly lit kitchen she had called home. The faint glow of a single oil lamp cast shadows that danced along the cracked walls. Mara, her mother, had moved with quiet precision, wiping counters, arranging herbs, her face lined with exhaustion but calm determination. Lena had watched her for years, learning more from the subtle strength in her mother's hands than any soldier's command ever could. Mara had always taught her that power was not in the size of the body, but in the precision of thought. "Watch the wind," she would whisper. "Feel the heartbeat of the world. Anticipate before it even moves." Those lessons had seemed mundane at first, lessons in patience and observation. But in the silence of the night, when Lena practiced with the old rifles tucked away behind the pantry, those lessons became her lifeline. Each shot was a conversation between her and the universe, a dialogue in which every detail mattered. By the age of 15, Lena had become a shadow of a soldier, silent, observant, lethal. She had trained under the radar, unnoticed by the estate staff, unnoticed by the general himself. Mara had always kept her from the spotlight, knowing the world outside was cruel, that men like Davin measured worth with strength and rank rather than skill and heart. "The world will underestimate you," Mara said one evening, handing her daughter a worn cleaning cloth for the rifle. "And that is your advantage. They will never see you coming, until it is too late." Lena's eyes traced the faint scratches on the wooden stock, each mark a memory of nights spent alone, learning trajectory, wind, and distance. She remembered one night vividly, the first time she had hit a target farther than anyone in the village would have dared. The rifle had felt like an extension of her arm, the recoil a whisper against her shoulder, and when the target had fallen, she had felt the world shift beneath her feet. That night, she had promised herself, "I will never be invisible again." Her memory returned abruptly to the present, to the firing range where the wind carried the metallic scent of spent bullets. The third target still awaited, farther than anyone dared aim for a novice. Lena's heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the desert, her senses stretching to match the distance. Behind her, soldiers whispered, awe creeping into their voices. Even the general's measured composure was cracking, though he would never admit it aloud. "You've trained for this?" Mara's voice echoed in her mind. "Every night, every shadow, every silence. Trust it." Lena exhaled slowly, adjusting her stance, her fingers steady, her eye aligning perfectly with the tiny steel plate at the edge of the range. The moment hung, suspended like a blade over the desert. General Davin took a step closer, the weight of his presence immense, yet she felt no fear, only focus. He had underestimated her, as the world always had, and now the consequences were unfolding in real time. Lena knew that this shot was more than a demonstration, it was a declaration. Every fiber of her being demanded that the world recognize her skill, her training, her determination. She squeezed the trigger, the sound cutting through the desert like a lightning strike. The bullet flew with unerring accuracy, the target exploding in a cascade of sparks. The soldiers gasped audibly, some stepping back instinctively, while others stared with wide, unblinking eyes. General Davin's jaw clenched, and for the first time, Lena saw respect, and perhaps a flicker of fear, reflected in his gray eyes. Silence followed, heavy and reverent. The wind seemed to pause, carrying away the echoes of her skill. Lena lowered her rifle slowly, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Behind her, the soldiers murmured in disbelief, and the general's sharp voice finally cut through the tension. "Remarkable," he said flatly, almost grudgingly. "But tell me, how did a maid's daughter learn to shoot like a ghost in the night?" Lena's lips curved into a small, confident smile, the desert sun catching her eyes like fire. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch, knowing the reveal would land heavier than words. The range held its breath, waiting for her next move. The desert sun dipped lower, turning the sand into a molten sea of orange and gold. Sweat streaked Lena's temples, but her focus was unwavering. The soldiers behind her shifted, whispers escalating into audible murmurs. Some glanced at each other nervously, while others simply watched, unable to look away. The firing line had become a stage, and Lena skilled the performance no one expected. General Davin stood nearby, hands clasped behind his back, jaw tight. Every instinct in his battle-hardened body screamed caution. He had faced insurgents, ambushes, and desert storms, yet this girl, this maid's daughter, posed a challenge he hadn't anticipated. Her calm, precise movements belied the tension in the air, a tension that now hummed like static electricity across the range. "Your third shot," Davin said, his voice low and measured, carrying the weight of authority yet tinged with something unfamiliar, curiosity. "You hit the target farther than anyone I've ever trained. But can you maintain it under pressure?" His gaze sharpened, probing. The general had a reputation for testing people beyond their limits, and now Lena was the one under his scrutiny. Lena didn't flinch. She reloaded, the metallic click of the rounds punctuating the desert stillness. Her pulse was steady, her mind calculating every variable: wind, distance, heat, heartbeat. She had trained for moments like this, and yet the stakes were higher than ever. These men, veterans of war, sharpshooters all, watched her as if she were a storm about to strike. A sudden gust of wind lifted dust into the air, stinging her eyes. Lena squinted, adjusting her aim. Every soldier behind the line tensed, sensing the invisible threat of failure. But Lena was beyond fear. She had spent years learning to embrace it, to use it as fuel. She exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of her own heartbeat guide her. The first shot of this round rang out with perfect precision, the bullet striking the plate at the edge of the range. Sparks flew, a sharp metallic clang echoing in the canyon. The soldiers exhaled audibly, disbelief flashing in their eyes. The general's lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of admiration, or perhaps caution, crossing his stern features. Lena's second shot followed almost immediately. This time the target was smaller, farther, set against the shimmering heat waves that danced over the desert sand. The bullet found its mark with deadly accuracy and the plate toppled. Whispers erupted behind her. Some soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Others simply stared wide-eyed. Davin's jaw tightened. He had underestimated her, and it was clear now that this was no ordinary demonstration. His mind raced, recalling every rumor about her secret training, every whispered story of her nights spent in silence with rifles and targets. She was a shadow, unseen, underestimated, but lethal. "Enough," he barked suddenly, a command cutting through the murmurs. The soldiers froze. "Step down. That's enough for now." Lena lowered her rifle, but she didn't move. Her eyes met the general's, unwavering, unyielding. She knew he had expected fear, hesitation, maybe embarrassment. He had expected a girl out of place. Instead, she had earned respect the hard way, through precision, skill, and courage. A hush fell over the firing line. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Lena's heart still pounded, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of proving herself. Behind her, the soldiers whispered in awe, realizing that the maid's daughter they had dismissed moments ago was now the center of every eye, every thought. Davin's gray eyes softened just slightly, a rare and fleeting crack in his stoic facade. "Remarkable," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "The girl, she's remarkable." For a brief moment, the desert was silent, the wind stilled, and Lena allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She had survived the first test, shattered assumptions, and claimed her place, even if no one else wanted to admit it yet. But beneath the calm, Lena felt it, a tension she couldn't ignore. This was only the beginning. The general's curiosity was a dangerous thing, and the soldiers' whispers were already turning into plans, doubts, and challenges. She had proven skill, but now the real test, the one that would define her future, was just beginning. The desert sun had begun its slow descent, casting elongated shadows across the firing range. The air shimmered in waves of heat, carrying the scent of gunpowder and scorched sand. Lena adjusted her stance, fingers brushing the cold metal of her rifle, the weight both familiar and comforting. Behind her, the soldiers shifted uneasily, their whispers rising to quiet murmurs of disbelief and in some cases envy. None had expected a girl, the general's maid's daughter, to dominate their domain. Lieutenant Carver, a sharp-eyed marksman with a reputation for arrogance, stepped forward, voice dripping with sarcasm. "So you've impressed the general, little miss," he said, glancing at Lena as though sizing her up. "But don't think this means we'll all bow down just because you've lucked into a few good shots." His smirk was thin, but the tension it created cut deeper than the desert wind. Lena didn't respond immediately. She knew better than to engage in petty arguments. Her training had taught her patience, focus, and the power of silence. Still, a flicker of awareness ran through her. These men, battle-hardened, seasoned, were now questioning her worth, their doubt a test more dangerous than the targets themselves. The general, observing from his vantage point, remained silent, his gray eyes sharp, calculating every reaction. He had expected amazement. What he hadn't anticipated was the ripple of jealousy that Lena's skill had triggered. "Shall we continue?" Lena finally asked, her voice calm, unwavering. She reloaded her rifle with precision, each movement deliberate, the faint metallic clicks echoing across the range. Carver scoffed but didn't step back, his pride forcing him to stay within her line of sight. The other soldiers murmured among themselves, tension stretching like an invisible wire through the line. The third target, perched precariously at 300 meters, awaited. Lena inhaled, exhaling slowly, letting her focus sharpen. Every lesson, every hour spent in shadows, every whisper from her mother came rushing back. The rhythm of wind, the pulse of the desert, the hum of anticipation. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot rang out, precise, unyielding. The plate shuddered, then fell, clattering against the sand. A ripple of awe traveled through the soldiers. Carver's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. The general's gray eyes narrowed, not in anger but in careful analysis. He was calculating potential, measuring limits, assessing threats, all while maintaining the stoic presence that had once intimidated generations of soldiers. Lena's second shot followed, even farther, faster, a whisper of metal slicing through heat-hazed air. The steel plate shattered, tiny fragments sparkling in the sun like sparks of defiance. The soldiers behind her exchanged glances, realizing that the girl who had been underestimated was now rewriting every expectation they held. Carver stepped closer, masking his insecurity with a forced chuckle. "Impressive," he said, though his tone trembled with barely hidden envy. "But can you handle this, under real pressure?" His words were both a challenge and a threat. He moved subtly, positioning himself to observe her reactions, looking for hesitation or fear. The general's voice cut through the tension, calm but edged with authority. "Enough chatter. Watch her." His gaze lingered on Lena, an unspoken acknowledgement that he was witnessing a skill far beyond what he had expected from the maid's daughter. A subtle shift ran through the soldiers. Even Carver paused, realizing that the general's attention carried weight heavier than their doubts. Lena's pulse was steady, but inside, adrenaline surged. She understood the challenge now was not just hitting targets, but navigating the invisible battlefield of pride, jealousy, and scrutiny. One wrong move, one hint of hesitation and she would be defined not by her skill, but by the perception of others. She exhaled, aligning her sight with the final target, her movements fluid, deliberate, and silent. The desert seemed to pause, holding its breath. Wind swept across the range, carrying whispers of anticipation and doubt alike. Lena's finger tightened on the trigger and time slowed. Behind her, the soldiers held their breath. The general watched with sharp calculation, and Carver's confidence wavered for the first time. Lena was not just a shooter now, she was a force, a challenge to every expectation, a quiet storm about to strike. The late afternoon sun cast long, molten shadows across the firing range, painting everything in shades of amber and steel. Dust swirled around Lena's boots as she crouched, the rifle's cold metal an extension of her body. Around her, soldiers shifted, murmurs dying into silence as the tension grew palpable. Every eye was fixed on her, every heartbeat echoing like the drum of an approaching storm. General Davin stood a few meters away, gray eyes sharp, every line in his weathered face etched with calculation. For decades, he had commanded the fiercest units, faced impossible odds and seen soldiers falter under pressure. Yet none had ever unsettled him like this young woman. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as a mere child with no place in a man's world. And now, with every steady breath and precise movement, she was dismantling every assumption. Lieutenant Carver, pride still bruised, lurked behind the line, watching closely, muscles coiled, ready to step in at the slightest sign of weakness. His smirk had faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. The soldiers around him exchanged glances, the air thick with disbelief and awe. Lena had become the epicenter of the range, a quiet storm that refused to be ignored. The final target loomed at 350 meters, smaller than the others, perched precariously against the desert heat waves. Lena's eyes traced its silhouette, calculating wind, gravity, and distance. Years of secret practice flashed through her mind. The nights in dimly lit kitchens, the whispered instructions from her mother, the countless repetitions that had molded her into this precise instrument. She inhaled, exhaled, letting the rhythm of her own pulse guide her. "Steady," she whispered under her breath, almost a ritual. Her finger pressed the trigger. The shot cracked across the canyon like lightning, the steel plate shivering violently before falling. Silence engulfed the range. Even the desert seemed to pause as if holding its breath. The soldiers blinked, staggered by the impossibility of what they had witnessed. Carver's jaw tightened. The general's eyes narrowed, a rare gleam of respect and awe flickering across his face. He stepped closer, boots crunching on the sand, his shadow stretching toward Lena. This was no longer a joke, no longer a simple demonstration. She had proven herself in a crucible that measured skill, courage, and composure all at once. "You've done more than impress," Davin said, voice low, deliberate. "You've shattered expectations." His gaze lingered on her, scanning not just her skill but her resolve. He saw a depth of focus, a calm determination forged in shadows and secrecy, that few soldiers ever possessed. Lena's chest rose and fell steadily. She didn't seek his praise but she didn't shy from it either. Her eyes met his, unwavering, a silent challenge. She had earned this recognition not through connections, not through rank, but through relentless dedication and skill honed in obscurity. A sudden gust of wind kicked up dust around her boots, threatening to obscure her sight, but Lena remained steady. Her third shot, her crowning strike, had landed, but the true victory was unspoken. She had claimed her place in a world that had always underestimated her. The soldiers whispered, some in admiration, others in disbelief, but all had witnessed the undeniable truth. Lena was no ordinary girl. Davin's eyes softened ever so slightly, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Remarkable," he said under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. The general had spent decades commanding men, and yet here, a maid's daughter had taught him a lesson in humility, precision, and unwavering courage. Lena lowered her rifle, the desert wind catching strands of her hair, the sun glinting in her eyes like molten gold. For a moment, everything held still, the range, the soldiers, even time itself. She had survived the crucible, and in doing so, she had rewritten the rules of the world around her. And somewhere deep in the general's chest, a quiet realization settled. This girl, this shadow he had overlooked, was destined for far more than anyone could imagine. The desert sun dipped lower, casting long flickering shadows across the firing range, as if time itself hesitated in awe of what had just occurred. Lena's rifle rested gently against her shoulder, her body calm yet brimming with controlled energy. The soldiers behind her shuffled awkwardly, whispers ricocheting like dry echoes off the canyon walls. Some faces betrayed disbelief, others envy, and a few, the rare ones, respect tempered with quiet awe. Lieutenant Carver's jaw remained tight, his earlier bravado shattered like the steel plates at Lena's feet. He couldn't understand how a girl barely 20 had outperformed every sharpshooter present, and worse, done so with a calm precision that bordered on uncanny. His pride burned, mingled with a grudging admiration he wasn't ready to voice. He stared at her, measuring every movement, realizing for the first time that this was no fluke. Lena had earned her skill through sheer will and relentless practice, and that fact gnawed at his ego like a persistent storm. General Davin, standing a few steps forward, broke the heavy silence, his voice firm yet carrying an undercurrent of respect. "Dismissed," he commanded, though his gray eyes never left Lena. It was an unusual word in this context, not a reprimand, but an acknowledgement that the performance had exceeded expectation. Soldiers began gathering their equipment, the desert dust curling around their boots like faint applause. Lena lowered her rifle slowly, breathing evenly. The adrenaline still pulsed through her veins, yet she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced judgment and emerged unbroken. She felt the weight of their gazes, not all approving, not all convinced, but she didn't flinch. For once, her years of secret training, every shadowed night, every whispered instruction from her mother, had culminated in undeniable recognition. From the back of the line, a whisper reached her ears, tentative, almost reverent. "Who, really is she?" Lena allowed herself a small, controlled smile. She didn't need to answer. The desert, the sun, the clanging steel, everything bore witness. Her skill spoke louder than any words ever could. General Davin finally stepped closer, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her. He surveyed her, taking in the calm determination etched across her face. He recalled every rumor he had ever dismissed, the maid's daughter, invisible in the halls, harmless, quiet. And now, standing before him, she was undeniable proof that appearances were only a fraction of reality. "You've done more than prove yourself today," he said, his voice low, almost intimate in its acknowledgement. "You've reminded us all that skill, discipline, and courage are not measured by age or rank." The soldiers shifted, some nodding slightly, others still wrestling with disbelief. Carver stepped back, jaw tight, swallowing pride and resentment alike. The lesson was clear. The girl they had dismissed had shattered their assumptions, rewriting their understanding of capability and focus. Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her, mingled with quiet pride. Yet beneath the satisfaction, a tension lingered. Recognition was one thing, acceptance another. She knew the general's acknowledgement was only the beginning. There would be whispers, doubts, challenges, and perhaps jealousy. But for this moment, she allowed herself to stand tall, to breathe the desert air like a survivor who had emerged victorious from a trial no one else could understand. Mara's voice, soft and proud, whispered in her memory, "You've done it, my girl. They see you now." Lena smiled inwardly, grateful for the years of secret guidance and the countless sacrifices that had made this moment possible. She was no longer invisible. As the soldiers gathered their gear and began to leave the range, Lena's eyes lingered on the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast canvas for future trials, future victories. She knew this was only the beginning. The world had seen her skill, but now it would test her resilience, her resolve, and her ability to navigate the unseen battles that always followed recognition. And somewhere deep in the general's chest, a thought flickered, quiet but undeniable. She isn't just talented. She's extraordinary. And I need to make sure she survives the world that will inevitably underestimate her again. The desert sun was a molten orb hanging low in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows across the firing range. Dust swirled around Lena's boots, a constant reminder of the unforgiving terrain. The earlier awe of the soldiers had faded, replaced by a simmering tension. Whispers of doubt, envy, and challenge rippled through the ranks, like currents beneath a calm surface. Lena sensed it all, every look, every subtle gesture, every heartbeat around her. General Davin's gray eyes bore into her, steady and sharp. He had seen her skill, witnessed her precision, yet he now recognized that this final moment would define more than marksman prowess. It would define her resilience, her composure under scrutiny, and her ability to command respect from a world that still underestimated her. The general's shadow stretched long across the sand as he stepped closer. "This," he said, voice low and deliberate, "is no longer about targets. This is about discipline, focus, and control. One last test." Lena's chest rose and fell steadily. She adjusted her stance, inhaling the desert air, letting it fill her lungs with calm determination. The final target had been set at 400 meters, a distance even seasoned sharpshooters approached cautiously. Behind her, Lieutenant Carver's jaw tightened, pride and resentment warring in his eyes. Other soldiers watched silently, recognizing the rare gravity of the moment. This was not simply a demonstration, it was a crucible, a measure of who Lena truly was. The wind shifted suddenly, sending streaks of sand across her vision. Lena blinked, recalibrating instantly. Every second, every breath, every micromovement mattered. Years of hidden training, silent nights, her mother's whispered guidance, all converged in this instant. She exhaled slowly, let her heartbeat settle, and aligned the rifle's sight with unerring focus. The first shot rang out, slicing through the desert heat with metallic clarity. The plate trembled and fell with a resounding clang. Gasps rippled through the soldiers, even those who had doubted her skill before. Carver's smirk had vanished entirely. The general's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes flickering with the rare acknowledgement of astonishment. The second shot followed immediately. Lena's calm precision didn't waver, despite the invisible weight of scrutiny pressing from all sides. The target shattered, fragments glinting in the low sunlight like sparks of defiance. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with awe and tension. Lena's hands were steady, her mind clear, her purpose undeniable. "Enough," Davin said, though his voice carried no impatience, only respect. He had been testing her, pushing boundaries, and now it was clear. She had surpassed all expectations. The general finally allowed himself a rare smile, a flicker of pride hidden beneath decades of hardened command. "Remarkable. You've proven yourself beyond measure." Behind her, soldiers murmured, some nodding, some swallowing hard in disbelief. Carver's pride battled with reality, forcing him to step back, respect tempered with lingering envy. Lena lowered her rifle, a calm smile curving her lips, letting the moment settle. She had survived scrutiny, envy, and extreme pressure, and emerged not just victorious but acknowledged. The desert wind whispered through the range as Lena felt something shift inside her. The invisible chains of doubt, imposed by others, had shattered. She wasn't merely the maid's daughter anymore. She was a force, a storm, a presence that demanded recognition. General Davin's voice cut softly through the wind, carrying both authority and admiration. "You've earned more than a demonstration today. You've earned the respect of every person here and of me. Never let anyone make you feel less than extraordinary." Lena met his gaze, steady and unwavering, a silent promise passing between them. The battles would continue, but she was no longer invisible, no longer underestimated. The firing range was silent but alive, holding witness to a young woman who had defied expectation and forged her place among giants. And somewhere deep in the general's chest, a quiet acknowledgement settled. The girl who had once been invisible was now undeniable, and her story was only beginning. The desert was painted in gold and crimson as the sun finally sank behind the distant dunes, casting long, gentle shadows across the firing range. The wind had softened, carrying a faint scent of gunpowder and scorched sand. Lena stood quietly, rifle lowered, absorbing the weight of what had just occurred. Around her, soldiers moved with subdued reverence, whispers of admiration and disbelief weaving through the air like a slow, unstoppable tide. General Davin approached, every step deliberate, his gray eyes reflecting the fading light. His presence had always commanded obedience and respect, yet now it carried something different, a quiet acknowledgement of skill, courage, and tenacity. He stopped just a few feet from Lena, his face impassive but lined with a rare softness. "You've done more than prove your skill today," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "You've reminded every person on this line, and me, that courage, precision, and dedication don't come from rank, privilege, or circumstance. They come from discipline and heart." Lena met his gaze steadily, calm and unwavering. For the first time she felt the invisible weight of judgment lift. Years of secrecy, practice, and perseverance had culminated in this moment. She was no longer the maid's daughter in the shadows. She was recognized, respected, and undeniable. The soldiers who had once doubted her now nodded subtly, their whispered envy replaced by quiet admiration. Lieutenant Carver, his pride still bruised, finally inclined his head, acknowledging her skill without words. Mara appeared at the edge of the range, her hands clasped tightly, eyes shimmering with pride. She had watched from a distance, unseen, yet fully aware of the storm her daughter had become. Lena felt the warmth of her mother's gaze, the silent affirmation of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every whispered lesson. Her strength had been forged in shadows, and now it radiated into the world. The general continued, voice steady, almost fatherly. I underestimated you. Not anymore. From this day forward, I want you to know that your talent, your courage, and your discipline will be recognized. The world will try to underestimate you again, but you've proven today that you are more than capable of facing it. Lena nodded, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. Gratitude, relief, pride, all mingled together. The desert, silent witness to her triumph, seemed to shimmer in acknowledgement. Her journey had not been about applause or validation. It had been about claiming her place, proving to herself, and now to the world, that she belonged. The soldiers began gathering their gear, their movements slower, more respectful. Carver lingered for a moment, eyes meeting Lena's. No words were exchanged, but a silent understanding passed between them. She had shattered every expectation, and that truth would linger in the minds of every man and woman who had watched her. General Davin finally straightened, casting a last glance at the horizon. You've earned something rare today, respect, recognition, and a reminder to us all that skill and courage can come from the most unexpected places. He paused, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Do not squander it. Lena lowered her rifle one final time, inhaling the crisp desert air, letting the moment sink in. She had faced scrutiny, doubt, and envy and emerged victorious. She had claimed her identity not through wealth, rank, or pedigree, but through unwavering dedication, focus, and heart. She glanced at her mother, who nodded silently, eyes glistening. This was the reward that mattered most. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and shadows stretched across the range like ink on sand. Lena knew this was only the beginning of her journey, but for now she allowed herself to stand tall, recognized, respected, and undeniable. The firing range had witnessed a storm, and the storm had been her. And in that quiet desert twilight, with the echo of falling steel still in the air, Lena finally felt the truth she had been chasing for so long. She was seen. She was heard. She was unstoppable.